This week's episode of the Moonlight Graham Show is brought to you by the People's Company. That's right, they are back as a sponsor because so often I hear from farmers throughout Iowa and throughout the Midwest who are listening to the podcast while they are planting, while they are harvesting. They're in their tractors, they're in their combines, which makes the People's Company a perfect partner for the Moonlight Graham Show here. As you guys probably well know, the People's Company is based in West Des Moines, Iowa, but they've really grown to be one of the nation's leading providers in land brokerage, land management, land appraisal, and investment services. These guys, and I know Andrew Zelmer and Matt Adams over there at the People's Company, these guys live and breathe farmland, farm management, and they know that industry better than anybody. So if you're looking to buy a farm, sell a farm, having an auction coming up, call the People's Company. They are the best in the business. Check them out at peoplescompany.com.
This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonlight Graham Show. Once again, I am your host, Tim Flattery, and this week on the podcast, our Moonlighter is our very first rugby player to come on the podcast. That's right, I said rugby, the fastest growing sport in the United States, the third largest sport in the entire world, behind soccer and behind cricket. And our Moonlighter is probably the greatest rugby player ever to come out of the state of Iowa. That's right. His name is Paul Emerick IV. And if you haven't heard of Paul Emerick, shame on you. Do a little Google research. Like I said, he's the greatest rugby player ever to come out of the state of Iowa. He grew up in Pella, Iowa. Was actually born in Emmitsburg, but grew up in Pella, Iowa. After Pella, he went to Central College there in Pella to play college football. Realized after a year that college football wasn't for him, so he gets into rugby, especially at the University of Northern Iowa. While he's still at UNI, he starts getting into USA Rugby. He ends up playing for USA Rugby for 10 years, plays in 3 World Cups with USA Rugby, plays 10 years professionally overseas. Today, he is a coach for the Houston SaberCats in the MLR, Major League Rugby. That's right, there is a Major League Rugby here in the United States. It's actually in its 3rd season right now. They just had to suspend their season because of the coronavirus. We recorded this interview right before the coronavirus came up, but they just suspended their season. They will be coming back next season. I think the league has been pretty successful so far. Paul Emerick, he's a coach for them right now, and I'm so excited to get him on the podcast because, like I said, we have never had a rugby player here on the Moonlight Graham Show ever before. And as you guys well know, because you're all loyal listeners of the podcast, the trusty co-host, Tom Griffin, he is a rugby coach. He coaches rugby up in Johnston, Iowa, and he's been telling me for 3 or 4 years now about how quickly every high school in the state, almost every high school in the state of Iowa, all of a sudden either has a rugby team or a rugby club, and it is becoming a big deal, and it's becoming not only an alternative for football, but also a good off-season sport for football. And so I don't know much about rugby. I've watched a little bit of it on TV. You know, you kind of see it in passing in the sports world, but it was so much fun to get Paul on the podcast to talk more about rugby, to learn a little bit more about it, to learn about Major League Rugby and also his experience. You know, how does a guy from Pella, Iowa become this world-renowned rugby player? And so that's a story that we tell here on the podcast today. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this week's episode with Moonlighter Paul Emerick. And if you like what we're doing here on the Moonlight Graham Show, make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify. Subscribe to the Moonlight Graham Show, and you know the drill. Leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We love hearing from you guys each and every week. And actually, that's how Paul Emerick came onto this show, is from hearing from you guys. It's probably because I went to UNI and I knew some rugby guys while I was at UNI, but I probably got 10 or 15 emails, direct messages over the last couple of years saying that we needed to get Paul Emerick on the podcast. So I'm excited that we finally made it happen today. So enjoy this week's episode with the first Moonlighter rugby player, the greatest rugby player ever to come out of the state of Iowa, Paul Emerick. But before we get to our interview, I know it's a tough time right now and a lot of people are out of work. So I wanted to talk about a new sponsor we have on the show, buildiowa.org, because the construction industry, especially throughout the Midwest, is still up and running and hiring. And so I was just on this website, buildiowa.org, and what really stood out to me was how much the professional men and women in this industry make. Did you know that professional estimators on average make between $62,000 and $80,000 a year? How about crane operators? What a cool job that is. They make between $60,000 and $70,000 a year on average. The other great part about buildiowa.org is how they spell out exactly how you can get started in the 27 different careers they have listed on the website. They have active resources to companies that are training and hiring. That's right, hiring right now. We know some of you moonlighters are looking for a career change, or perhaps you've been impacted by this pandemic. If that's you, head on over to buildiowa.org and check out the incredible careers available right now in the construction industry. There's also a link to a job board that lists active jobs that are open right now. The good people at Build Iowa are here to help, and they want to make you aware that there are rewarding career options available for you. And for those of you on social media, check them out. You can find them Build Iowa on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. That's right, buildiowa.org. So, Paul, as I'm looking up, doing my Paul Emerick research, I keep coming up to the point that you're from Emmitsburg, Iowa. And yet, the more I dig into it, I realize you're actually from Pella. So which one is it, Emmitsburg or Pella?
Well, so a bit of both, I guess. I was born in Emmitsburg, and then when I was 6 years old, we moved to Pella. So I pretty much went, kindergarten through high school in Pella, Iowa.
So you missed out on all the great football and wrestling teams over at Emmitsburg then?
I did. But I did my own football and wrestling at Pella.
Yeah, were you guys any good?
So for wrestling, I qualified for state 3 times, placed 4th. And then in football, my senior class, it was the first time we had made the semifinals. It was Jay McKinstry's first year of coaching, and Matt Schulte. Coach Schulte's no longer there, but Jay McKinstry, he's since won 4 or 5 football championships in almost as many years. So he was a really good football coach. That kind of, we were kind of that first class to start off his freshman year of coaching, which wasn't too bad.
Yeah, you guys were right at the front end of that then.
Yeah, my senior year was his first year as a high school head coach.
What type of football player were you then?
I was an outside linebacker. We ran a 4-4 system and always kind of lined up to the wide side of the field, the open side, I guess. And it was kind of a hybrid, like cover flats, cover slot receivers, and still come up for the run type work. So, and as type of a football player, I guess, I'd like to rate myself as a bit of a physical guy on the football field.
Well, I got to imagine, being a rugby player that you are today, that you were the type of football player that craved contact, that liked contact. What was it, though, that drew you from, being a high school wrestler and football player to wanting to get into college rugby after high school?
Yes, and I'm going to go back one further and say, my wrestling was, the catalyst and kind of set the tone for all of my other football and rugby and stuff. I'm a big fan of that sport. It teaches you so much in regards to discipline, toughness, mental toughness, aggression, and it never hurts to be fluent in the art of combat there. So it was a lot of the physical, mental, and tools I needed that carried over in football, and then rugby as well. I went to college to play football. I was a first team All-State, played in the Shrine Bowl, all of that fun stuff, and then did my freshman year, and I just kind of, I just kind of lost the love for football, I guess. And there's some guys that I knew socially, and they said, "Hey, come check out rugby." And I went and watched it, and just kind of thought to myself, oh, this is kind of like backyard football. And played that first weekend. I went to go watch, as a lot of guys at that time did. So I guess I graduated in '98 from high school, and the fall of '99, I kind of started playing rugby.
What was it that got you to fall out of love for football?
To be honest with you, it was just. I mean, I know I was a freshman in that, but I wasn't playing, and it was a lot of work, like a lot of weight room time and meetings and all of that. And I just kind of thought, well, if I'm not really playing, and statistically speaking, like I wasn't gonna, play in the NFL, so I just kind of said, I'll lift and run on my own because I enjoy it, and then I found rugby, and I really didn't start taking rugby serious until probably my second year. A guy came up to me and asked me if I knew who the Eagles were, and the Eagles are the U.S. national team. I thought he might have been talking about, the band the Eagles or maybe the Philadelphia Eagles. And, he told me, no, there's this national team, the U.S. Eagles, and they play rugby all over the world. And I thought that was really interesting. So there was a pathway back then, which is no longer in existence, but you play for your club team, and then you represent the state of Iowa. And then from there, you play in a Midwest territorial tournament against all the other states. And then and then you make the Midwest select side team. And then you play all the other territories in the U.S. And from that was the selection pool for the U.S. national team. So that by the time I graduated, 2003, I had my first cap or my first appearance for the U.S. national team, and I had done some sevens tournaments with the U.S. national team as well, and been on a few rugby tours with the All-Americans, and I kind of saw rugby as it was fun. First and foremost, it was fun. I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed all of the different skill sets you had to learn as well. We have to be able to run the ball, pass the ball, tackle, kick the ball, and so it's not as one-dimensional as football. So we take some football, some wrestling, some basketball, some soccer, and they all have skill sets unique to those sports that we need to have for rugby.
Yeah, interesting. And so what is that level of competition like when you ended up graduating from University of Northern Iowa? I'm a fellow Panther myself, but it's a club sport there. And so it's different than your basketball team or your football team. It's a club sport. And so I got to imagine there's some guys that maybe had never played rugby before. I mean, you never played rugby, I guess, until college, but some guys just wanted to be part of the club, right? They liked maybe the team and the parties, and they had buddies on that team. And then other guys like yourself had higher aspirations. So what was that mix of guys like?
Yeah, I mean, there absolutely was a mix of those guys that were, enjoyed the social component of rugby. And, and I'll admit too, that's when I first started playing, that was the initial draw was, the camaraderie that's built with all these rugby guys and having a few beers. And then also what's unique about rugby is it's customary at the end of a match to sit down and have food and a drink with your opponent. Whatever happens on the field stays on the field, and it's an opportunity for you to get to know your opposition. And oddly enough, I have some good friends that I've never played on the same team with, but against plenty of times, and we still stay in touch today. And so I enjoyed that part of the culture as well. But in college, I had another fellow Iowan, Tom Billups, who coaches out at Cal University, Cal Berkeley, for their rugby team. He said, hey, if you want to go to the national team, play professionally, you have control of your fitness and your skill acquisition. So perhaps when I took it more seriously, I was doing extra running, or I was doing the amount of running I needed to do to get where I wanted to go. And my teammates, some of them worked out with me, some of them didn't, but I just kind of went on a little bit different mission. But they were always there to help, with my passing, catch kicks, and we're always supportive.
Now, the big issue in football nowadays, and maybe across all sports, is concussions and CTE. And I've always heard, and I've never verified this, but I've always heard that there are less concussions in rugby where most guys are not wearing anything on their head. Some guys are wearing more of a padded helmet than there is in football, where obviously you have a football helmet on. How many concussions have you had, and have you seen that statement hold true?
So I've had a few. It was later in my career where the whole CTE, recognize, remove, recover, started coming into place. And I had probably a fair few in football as well. But I think the main difference between the numbers between less concussions in rugby than there is football is in rugby all of your contact comes from your field division, meaning. Do you remember the game Red Rover?
Oh yeah.
You're a line of kids. So that's a lot of our defensive principles. We stay in a flat line and we come up together. So, defensively or on attack, the contact is coming from the field division. So, and we do a lot more coaching on the tackle technique, angle of entry, striking with your shoulder, head behind. In rugby, just because we're not wearing helmets, we can't be putting your head in front of people's knees. So we work a lot with that. And, for me, wrestling was listen, kids, if you want to be a good tackler for football or rugby or whatever it is, go wrestle. It's the foundation for those combat techniques. For wrestling. So I really didn't have, too many from tackles, but it is a contact sport and they happen. Right? Sometimes you get caught out of position. Sometimes a guy steps into you funny and you can't get your head out of the way. And, but it happens. But there is less, and that's because we can prepare for all the contact. You look at football and they're really starting to crack down on, the blind side, crackdown blocking and hitting defensive receivers across the middle and all of that. And I think with those rule changes and we have to wrap in rugby as well. You can't just throw your shoulder into someone. You'll get penalized. You'll get suspended. And, maybe that's a rule that the NFL needs to adopt, that we just can't smash guys over. We have to actually make an attempt to wrap someone in the tackle.
So, Paul, you've played all over the world, not only with the U.S. national team, but also on clubs all over the world. Where is rugby most popular?
The two places that I played and lived where rugby was like the number one sport was in New Zealand and in Wales. Just it is on all the newspapers, all of the TV headlines, the sport. It is, rugby's a big deal, and it's usually stemmed around their national teams, which also they're fans of the professional club teams in those regions because that's what feeds into the national team as well. But those two countries, rugby is definitely number one in their sporting culture, and it was. It's fun to be. It's fun to be in that culture. You're a rugby player, and rugby is important, and it's growing here in the States too. It's becoming more relevant with the addition of the Major League Rugby.
Right, and you're coaching with the Major League Rugby right now, and I heard an interview with Mark Cuban, who is a rugby veteran in his own right, and Mark Cuban apparently is friends with the guy who's running Major League Rugby right now, and he made the comment that if rugby is ever going to take off in America, this is the league to do it, and this is the guy to lead it. So what is Major League Rugby doing right now?
Well, we're in our third year, and all the teams at least I know, and I know a lot of the coaches, some of them I played with on the national team as well throughout the league, is that local development. I know here in Houston, we spend a lot of time out in the rugby community. It makes sense for us to grow rugby within the elementary schools and the high schools, and because those are the kids that potentially going to play for the Houston SaberCats, or two, they're going to like rugby and they're going to be fans, and we want them to come out and support. So, there's a 10,000-foot view. Yeah, we finally have professional rugby here where we can pay guys to play, but when you really start looking closely, all these clubs are working hard to grow rugby in their respective communities. Like I said, we need those American kids to develop into potential Houston SaberCats, but also, those are butts and seats.
Right, and it seems like over the past 5 years here in the state of Iowa, rugby is just all of the talk. I mean, I went to a junior college out of high school at Iowa Central in Fort Dodge, and all of a sudden they have a rugby team, and they're nationally ranked. They're really good, and so they're playing collegiate rugby, not at the club level, but like as part of the school program, a scholarship program, and every high school around here now has a rugby team. Are you seeing that down in Houston? Is that nationwide, or is that just happening in the middle of the country?
So each region is pretty unique in terms of their growth and when they play rugby. Right now, the high school rugby season is going on in Houston. Winters down here are fabulous. I try to avoid the summers if I were you, but so high school rugby in Houston has been going. Some of the clubs more than 15 years. And then, we continue to do outreach, and we've started a few new high school clubs, and some of our players actually go out and help coach a session a week as part of our community outreach. And in Iowa, Brent Wheeler, he's the coach of Southeast Polk. He was kind of on that first group of guys to start rugby. And they play rugby sevens, which is a version that's in the Olympics. Yeah, and it makes it easier to start a sevens team than a regular 15s team. You can get 15 guys out to start a team, whereas for 15-a-side rugby, you need upwards of kind of 30.
What do you prefer, the 15s or the sevens?
Oh, I love sevens just because of the space and all of the one-on-one opportunities you get. But 15s has always paid my bills or has been a way to make a living.
Right.
But there is now with the U.S. national team sevens squad, those guys are able to make a living and do okay for themselves. But for me, I had to I spent 10 years over in Europe playing professionally, and that's how I was able to make a living. The MLR wasn't here yet.
Paul, I noticed that you had a couple notable suspensions in your career. One for kicking a guy in the head. Were you a dirty player?
So that was probably not as bad as it sounds there when you write it down. But listen, I was aggressive. I was very aggressive in my nature, and pushed the line a lot. And sometimes your emotions and aggressions get away from you. And that was a little tackle that went wrong, and some. I'm not saying I'm warranted to do that, but was a little bit aggravated, and I retaliated, and so you sat down for the rest of the game. And a few weeks after, there was another tackle in a World Cup that I just lost control of, and World Cup only comes around every 4 years, and I didn't get to participate in the rest of that World Cup. So, it's there are laws here in rugby. It's not the Wild West. You can be aggressive and physical within those parameters, and sometimes I like to push them.
That's right. I mean, I think you have to, right? Otherwise, you're slipping behind. Somebody's going to be pushing the boundary all the time.
Yep.
Is rugby, like when you get down in those scrums in rugby, is there a lot of hand fighting that goes on or stuff that either the fans or the officials don't see?
They're in the scrums, and if I got one of our props who are in the front row of that scrum, he'd probably do a whole hour interview on the intricacies of what actually goes on in there. Apart from those 6 guys that are in the front row, I'm not quite sure anyone else knows what goes on. But I do know that they try and there's 8 of them in the pack, which 8 and 8 form a scrum. 8 from the pack from the Houston SaberCats, 8 from, say, DC Old Glory was the team that we just played. So they'll form a scrum, and their objective is to stay tight as one unit so they can push together. So some basic technique is to have a flat back, squeeze as tight as you can so you're one unit, and then you get everyone driving at the same time. And it's a dogfight in there. Now there's no like real hand fighting or punching or anything going on. It's tough when you got 8 guys pushing against another 8 guys.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier like New Zealand and Wales. The people there are just crazy about rugby. What are those crowds like? Because you see a lot of, European soccer crowds, and they're singing the chants the whole time and the songs, and they're all wearing the colors. Are those type of crowds similar for rugby in New Zealand and Wales?
Yes, they are. But the main difference is that say Wales will play England, and the Welsh fans next to the English fans without any trouble. A lot of times with those soccer competitions, it's like, okay, if you're a Manchester United fan, you sit over here, and if you're a Chelsea fan, you sit over there, because there would be riots if we let you intermix. Right. But in rugby, it's part of the spirit of the game and the culture of the game. You can sit down next to the opposing team's fan, and you can have a beer and have a few laughs and congratulate each other for, when their team does a good job. And, that's within the spirit of the game.
So you mentioned earlier that it's like part of the culture to sit down with the other team after a game and have a beer together and get to know them. So, but what if you're playing a tournament with multiple games in the same day? So have you ever played a game drunk?
No, I haven't. And, it's unsafe. But there are tournaments, like 7s, you'll play multiple games in the day. In 15s, you only play one match in a day. You wouldn't ask an NFL guy to play multiple football games in a day. So for a full 80-minute rugby match, you just play the one. But even at the 7s tournaments on the international stage, which is about 6 games conducted over 2 days, there is a function afterwards, and you do, and go eat, sit down with all the opposing teams, and chat with them.
Right. What do you think is the peak or the potential for rugby here in the United States? Do you think it'll ever get to the point where it's maybe on the same level as a hockey, in that like 4th or 5th most popular sport in the country?
Well, I think a good growth curve and kind of growth pattern to look at is what soccer has done in the MLS, right? If you look at kids' participation after the MLS was formed, so it's going to take a while. I think for me, I see rugby as a fantastic off-season sport for football players. If you're a defensive football player, having double-digit tackles is almost unheard of. But in rugby, you'll have many, many more tackle attempts and opportunities in any game than you would in football. It is miles away harder fitness to play rugby than it is football. So we're practicing some evasion pursuit skills, and you're getting your fitness in. And there's some good stories, and I'll have to send you some links of a few of the small town football teams who started a rugby team in the spring, who went from like a 3-8 record to making the state football finals the next year. And, the football coach is quick to point out, hey, all of these guys played rugby in the spring together. Obviously they're different sports, but if we can, we can pull synergies from other sports that help us get better in our favorite sport, right?
Oh, absolutely. And do you think, the transferable things from like football to rugby, you mentioned earlier, you got to be able to tackle in rugby, you got to be able to wrap up, but I got to imagine like the nonstop movement of rugby just puts you in a whole nother stratosphere as far as being in shape.
It does. And it's unique in that way where think football, I need to be explosive and combative, but then I get a break, right? Or rugby, we need to be able to recall that explosiveness and be combative, but then we have to get up, jog to another position to maybe do it right after that, or, it might be a few phases or a few seconds afterwards where you have to, participate in that sprint and combative situation. But, I think rugby would definitely lend itself to football better than football does for rugby. I think if I were to tell a kid who's concentrating on rugby to, what sports would I want him to play outside of rugby, I'd tell him go play basketball, soccer, and wrestling.
No baseball.
Those are no real baseball. I mean, you get some eye-hand coordination with the basketball, and I'm not quite sure what transferable skills baseball.
I'm just a baseball fan, Paul.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I take that personal.
Okay, sorry about that.
So
we had a few baseball players at UNI that were really good rugby players.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, everybody knows that the baseball players are the best athletes on campus up at UNI.
Yes,
I don't need to tell you that though. So what'd you think about a couple of years ago when Jarryd Hayne tried to make it in the NFL? I mean, he was one of the best rugby players in the world, and he had a shot. He got signed by the San Francisco 49ers. He made the team. Yeah. He was in the backfield for a while for him, and I think he got injured, and then he eventually went back to rugby shortly after that. But what did you think about how that played out?
I thought it was a good attempt, I come back to it. I think rugby is more transferred to football than, football is the other way. Even more recently is Christian Wade with the Buffalo Bills. He was my teammate over at the London Wasps when I was over there playing, and, he's a very quick, evasive, runs good lines, and, he gets plenty of those opportunities and looks in rugby, and that transfers over pretty well for him for being a running back in football.
Now, I know, or I'm not sure. I don't think you ever played in New Zealand for New Zealand, but I know a lot of teams outside of like the New Zealand All Blacks do one of those like haka dances at the start that looks like it's from, Samoa. Have you ever played for a team that does one of those?
I have not. I've played against teams that do the haka. That's a traditional Maori war dance, an invitation of contest, as it were. The Fijians have a version. I believe it's called the Sipitao, and Samoa and Tonga each have their own versions. No, I've other than trying to mimic what New Zealand or Samoa does, I've never really participated in any of those war dances. It's I suppose it's just not within our American culture.
Right. Is it intimidating to play a team that fires the crowd up that way before a game?
You could be intimidated, but if you educate yourself and know what it is, you can also be honored by it. That this is, like I said, a part of their culture and their history, and it's an invitation to start. So let's go to war here. So it's a pretty cool thing, and yeah, after they do that, it gets the crowd fired up.
No doubt.
Sure.
Well, Paul, the way we end every episode of the Moonlight Graham Show is with the 5 big questions. And our first question is, who's your all-time favorite teammate?
Oh, man. It has to be Alec Parker.
Where'd you play with him?
I played with him on the U.S. national team for just under a decade. He's a good guy. He's from Aspen, Colorado, up there, and has remained and since been one of my best friends.
What's one memory that you have from your career that reminds you of everything that you love about rugby? It's
probably the 2011 World Cup was my third and last World Cup. It was significant in that regard, and I felt, I played really well, and it was just it was a nice tour, and there were some good moments to be had in that. But it was it kind of summed up. You're out of country with 30 other guys, and we're there for 6 weeks. Training and preparing for the third largest sporting event in the world. There's some good memories of team building, team camaraderie, and everyone working hard towards a goal.
Is there anything from your career that still nags at you?
No. I suppose I could point out some low points with as we spoke about earlier, some suspensions and problems with aggression at times, but that was just the fabric that made me as a player, and it's all brought me here to Houston, coaching at a professional team. And if I would have changed one of those things, would I be here? I don't know. So I'll keep everything the same. It was a good journey.
What are you most proud of, Paul?
I'm very proud that playing for the U.S. national team. I was the first in the back position to play over 50 games for the U.S. I played in 3 World Cups for the U.S. as well, and 10 years professionally. I think helped pave the way for other Americans to go overseas. And there's been a few other people that have achieved 3 World Cups, but not too many. So, my time with the national team and my tenure there was something I'm very proud of.
That's cool. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Coach Tom Phillips. You are in control of your fitness and skill acquisition. Those are 2 things that, really hit home with me, that I can be better than anyone around me because I have control of how much I practice my skills and how much weightlifting and running I do, and head down and work hard and take the opportunities, and good things will happen.
Absolutely. So you're coaching the Houston SaberCats right now in the MLR. How can people up here in Iowa follow the Houston SaberCats?
So go find usmlr.com. And all of our games are on TV. They're either on ESPN, ESPN Plus, ABC. All the games are played on Saturday and Sundays. And all the games are aired. If not, there's usually a Facebook Live link that we also broadcast on. So jump on Facebook, find your Houston SaberCats rugby team, give them a like.
There you go.
And come watch us play.
And before I forget, what was your favorite bar in Cedar Falls?
Oh, Suds, hands down.
FAC at Suds?
Oh, yes. Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Yep, always there, FAC at Suds. And this summer is going to be the UNI Men's Club 50th anniversary that they've been a club. So I'll probably be up there at Suds in July with all of our old rugby teammates and doing some fundraising for the club at UNI. Are
you the best UNI rugby player of all time?
Depends who you ask.
Oh, I'm asking you.
You ask some of my. No. Yeah, maybe I am, but I've always had my teammates are quick to keep me humble and remind me of just how bad I was when I first started. So, like I said, depends on who you ask.
Well, we got to give a shout out to Andrew Zelmer. I don't know if you ever played with Andrew Zelmer. I think you're a few years older than him, but he is maybe the most loyal UNI rugby player I've ever met. That guy, it's almost like he's still part of the UNI Rugby Club.
Yeah, that was another thing I really enjoyed about rugby was you just get passionate people who fall in love with this different sport and they embrace it as their own. And, as you know, with working with any team, it takes a whole bunch more staff outside of the players to really make a program flourish. So I'm happy Andrew's up there helping to support the club still.
Nice. All right, Paul. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and joining the Moonlight Graham Show, man. It's been fun getting caught up.
You bet. Hopefully you can have me on again sometime.
Hey guys, thanks once again to listening to today's episode of the Moonlight Graham Show. And even though I do most of the interviews here on the podcast, there is a ton of work that happens behind the scenes that you guys don't see that make each episode possible. So I got to give a shout out to the Moonlight Graham Show team. First of all, Brian Sandvig, our producer. Brian does all of the post-production work, and in real life, he's not just a podcast producer, he's also a real estate agent. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home down in the Kansas or Missouri areas, give Brian Sandvig a call. Next guy on that list is Brendan Gargano. Brendan does all of our design and artwork here on the podcast. He's one of the most talented artists I've ever met, and I love all of his work. If you need any help on the design side with logos or anything like that, give Brendan Gargano a call. The next guy on that list is Andy Flattery, my older brother. Andy, of course, has done some of the interviews here on the podcast. He also is a certified financial planner. He owns a business called Simple Wealth Planning. If you need any help in that area, check Andy Flattery out. And then, of course, the trusty co-host Tom Griffin and my younger brother Neil Flattery. Those guys are just busy being husbands, being fathers, they're family men, but also they do a ton of work here on the show. So thanks again for listening. We really appreciate you guys subscribing and supporting the Moonlight Graham Show.